All right, hello everyone. One last week, a few more videos. I appreciate that you guys have been watching these. Those of you who have, those of you who have not, hey, I get it. Life's hard right now. I understand if this is not your priority. Uh, Today, I'm gonna keep it short. Talk about my man Ishmael Reed in this video, and I'll do one other one about Nikki Giovanni. Wednesday, I will be recording a longer video that um, will basically be like for you to play instead of the audio or in addition to the audio while you watch the movie They Live. I'll watch the film and give a commentary track about different things in the movie, different points of view, just kind of like a running, what used to be called a DVD commentary. You know, if you bought a DVD, like a fancy edition, and the director's sitting there talking smack, giving you insights into the movie while you watch it. After you've already seen it, you watch it with a commentary. So check that out. That will help you if you're doing the final exam, which again is optional. But if you're doing the final, that will help you write the exam questions. Yeah, so let's start with Ishmael Reed right now. And then we're going to listen to some music by a dude named Sun Ra. Also, Sun Ra. Born in 1914. I think he died in 19. When did Sun Ra die? I think he died in 1990 or something like that. 93. Okay. So that'll be after. Very cool jazz musician, very unique guy. Anyways, back to Reed. Reed, just an overall thought about it. So this part of the book is called the 1960s. And if you've been reading this stuff, you're probably like, wow, they say the N-word a lot. they 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 weren't playing around. They were trying to like start something with the police or the authorities with these poems. That's very much a sign of the times. You know, the United States in the 1960s. There was a lot of promise, a lot of political struggle. You know, there was basically a civil war going on, a low-intensity civil war that people call the civil rights movement nowadays. But really at the time it felt like warfare to some extent. And to give you some examples, like troops that came home from Vietnam would go, within weeks of coming home, they would be asked to go out and patrol the cities they were from because there would be large-scale open rebellions. This was especially true if you read Nikki Giovanni today in the summer of 1968, because Martin Luther King had been killed in April of 1968, and it led to just a series of ongoing urban rebellions, riots, whatever you want to call them. Sorry, I'm getting a text. So it's quite a time, and the people who were reading here, they were young. You know, it's 1938 he's born, so in 68 he's 30. By the time this book is published, he's 33 years old. And you see some of that sense of rebellion is really coloring, not just coloring, but informing in an essential way the poetry of these writers. They have, you know, Reed went on to basically, he's more or less a humorist, like he's a satirist. You know, his most recent work that's garnered headlines is a play criticizing a play you may have heard of called Hamilton by this dude, Lin-Manuel Miranda. And I guess the thing to understand is that with this book, especially with all, there is a lot of there are a lot of poets here at the end of the book. It's the majority of the book, the 1960s almost. Yeah. No, it really is. It's the last, you know, it's the last 150, 200 pages of the book. But really, it's only a small sampling, a very, just a taste of the different writers, okay? So I wouldn't want you to think that this is representation, an accurate reflection of their writing overall, as much as it is just a sampling of the writing they were doing then, and really a reflection on the time period that they were living in, okay? A reflection on the time period they were living in. So this is all just to say that watch out for this poem I'm about to read. Read, and then the other thing to think about just more broadly, so all these writers, they're in this period of rebellion in the 1960s. The 60s kind of fizzled out in the 1970s. The political progress that was made, and by progress I mean expanding rights for oppressed people, black people, women, gays and lesbians, however, that all sort of fizzled in the 70s, and we've really been living in a long period of reaction, meaning the conservatives have won for like 50 years almost now. More than that, really. I mean, Nixon came to power in the 68 election on a platform very similar to Trump's in many ways, calling for quote unquote law and order, which basically meant cops can do whatever they want. And what happened what happened to all these revolutionary writers? Well, they adapted to society by, in a way, their writing gave them prestige, and they capitalized on that prestige by becoming prominent academics. And there's, just to go back to just a review now, Franz Kafka, the author of the Metamorphosis. Kafka is also famous for this thing called the Octavo Manuscript, where he it just includes a lot of his aphorisms. That is short, pithy sayings, like deep thoughts, quotes, whatever. The deep, witty memes in a way. Okay, they're called parables or aphorisms, and one of the great ones is called the leopards in the temple. And I think it's a really accurate way of understanding what happened with people like Ishmael Reed or Leroy Jones, Amiri Baraka, or Nikki Giovanni, and so on. People who started life in a position of rebellion and then ended up teaching at one of the greatest universities in the country, where you are, if nothing else, an authority if you're teaching there, okay? And this is how Kafka's parable goes. The leopards in the temple. So you have to imagine a temple or a church, and wild animals come into the temple. Leopards break into the temple and drink to the dregs what is in the sacrificial pitchers. This is repeated over and over again. Finally, it can be calculated in advance, and it becomes a part of the ceremony. In other words, the leopards who were disrupting the church and threatening it are eventually incorporated into the proceedings of the church as part of the ceremony. And that's really a way to think of the writers like Ishmael Reed. They start out in this position of rebellion, but because they're so good at writing or whatever, they're rewarded with high positions within academia and intellectual life in the country, and they're incorporated into the ceremony. So that, for example, he never got a degree, a BA, but because he was such a great writer, he was eventually, the school he attended but didn't graduate from, SUNY Buffalo, they gave him an honorary doctorate in the mid-90s, and he has another one from University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. So these young rebels eventually become sort of grand old authorities. And it's not something to be cynical about, it's just something to kind of, reflect on and understand that that's a phenomena in our society, that people who start, and that our society is pretty good at capturing rebellion and turning it into something that's part of the system. That can be by giving literary rebels academic jobs. It can be by, you know, I don't know, Pepsi Cola making. I think you guys may have seen this Kendall Jenner, Kylie Jenner, one of those dumb Instagram celebrities, doing a commercial where she takes a Coke into what looks like a Black Lives Matter protest and hands it to a cop, and they like drink it, and everybody's friends. So they co-opt the movement to sell Pepsi, which Pepsi sucks. So I mean, you got to do what you got to do to sell something shitty. Anyways, let's look at this poem that very fittingly. I'm on page 284. This poem Reed wrote called "Bad Man of a Guest Professor," where he essentially is prophesizing what will become his destiny, his fate, to enter academia. But here he is as the leopard in the temple, still not yet incorporated in the ceremony. Kind of imagine himself standing up there talking smack and disrupting and interrupting the comfortable, cool, sort of staid, conservative, white, elite environment of academia at the time. Okay? Something that doesn't go on enough at Queensborough. You guys need to rebel more in a more intellectual way, not just by like open kind of simple defiance, but intellectually rebel with a nice poem like this one. Okay, for the bad man of the guest professor. Ambiguous title, but you got to imagine him or someone like him, like sort of a rebellious young person, full of learning, full of insight and energy, but yet not yet incorporated into the ceremony of academia in an official way, as he will be eventually. So I'll read this poem. It's rather long, and then we'll listen to a little Sun Ra. You worry me, whoever you are. I know you didn't want me to come here, but here I am just the same, hijacking your stagecoach, hauling in your pocket watches, and making you hoof it all the way downtown, all the way to town. Black Bart, a robber with an art. I left some curses in the cash box, so you'll know it's me. He robbed them. He came in the classroom and robbed the professors of his job. Okay, he described himself as like a bandit, a highwayman. Listen, and it's through his poetry that he's able to do this, through his charisma as a speaker and intellectual and so on. Listen, man, I can't help if your thing is over, kaput, fini. No matter how you slice it, Dick, you are done. A dead duck, all out of quacks, the nagging hiccup that goes on and on without a simple glass of water for relief. You've been teaching Shakespeare for 20 years. This is part 2 now. You've been teaching Shakespeare for 20 years, only to find the joke on you. The eavesdropping rascal who got it in the shins because he didn't know enough to keep his feet behind the curtains. A sad sack head served on a platter in Titus Andronicus or Falstaff, too fat to make a go of it anymore. 3. It's like, what do you know of Shakespeare? You know to read it, but you don't feel it how I do. I live that violence. I am Falstaff. Falstaff's this sort of tragic comic figure in a bunch of the history plays. He's like a brilliant buffoon who's always drunk. You know, you'd be right to if you know and feel yourself a writer and feel a connection with Falstaff at like a spiritual level, you'd be right to, when you listen to someone who's a professor talking about it, be like, man, what do you know? I just read it in books. I've lived it. I've been Falstaff, okay, while you were sitting in the library. It's not my fault that your tradition was knocked off WAP style and left in the alley with pricks in its mouth. I read about it in the papers, but it was no skin off my nose. Wasn't me that opened the gates and allowed the rustlers to slip through unnoticed. You ought to do something about your security or mend your fences, partner. Don't Don't look at me if all these niggas are ripping up their deadwood dick. Or ripping it up like deadwood dick. Doing art the way it's never been done. Making Wurlitzer sorry he made the piano that will drive Mozart to the tennis courts. Making Smith Corona feel like the red-faced university that has just delivered China some 5011 H-bombs experts. I didn't deliver the blow that drove the abstract expressionists to my lady's linoleum, where they sleep beneath tons of wax and dog shit and the muddy feet of children. Or because some badass black painter done sent French Impressionism to the walls of high-rise lobbies where they belong is not my fault. Martha Graham will never do the jerk shoes. The jerk, she's a sweet old soul, but her hips can't roll. As stiff as the Greek statues she loves so much. Martha Graham was a choreographer for modern dance, and you can kind of see he's, mocking the white establishment there. Interesting though, Graham was a communist essentially. I'm 4 now. These are the reasons you did me nasty. J. Alfred Prufrock is a famous poem by the great right-wing conservative white American turned British author T.S. Eliot, the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock. These are the reasons you did me nasty, J. Alfred Prufrock. The trick you pulled in the bookstore today, stand in the corner, no peaches for a week, you lemon. You must blame me because your wife is ugly. 86 by 1,000 discriminating saunas. That's why you did that sneaky thing. I won't tell the townsfolk because you have to live here and I'm just passing through. He's a guest professor, just passing through. You got one thing right though. I did say that every time I read William Faulkner, I go to sleep. Faulkner's a famous white Southern novelist, won the Nobel Prize. I haven't read him, but he's highly acclaimed. When I read Hemingway, again, Ernest Hemingway, famous American novelist, white, both white, I wish that one of them bulls, he wrote about bullfighting and hunting, kind of macho guy, would have jumped a fence and gored his fingers so that he wouldn't have taken up so much good space. Fitzgerald wouldn't have known a gangster if one had snatched Zelda and made her a mole, though she would have been grateful, I bet. Again, he's like, what do you guys know of it? You're just posers. F. Scott Fitzgerald is, probably heard or at least read or at least were told about the book The Great Gatsby in high school. Bonnie and Clyde wrote the saga of suicides. Sal, just the feds were closing in. It is worth more than the collected works of T.S. Eliot, a trembling Anglican whose address is now the hell that thrilled him so. Last word from down there. He was opening a publishing house, a publishing company that will bore the devil back to paradise. Bonnie and Clyde, the actual gangsters, way cooler, way better, way realer story than these high literary figures like Eliot, who's now dead. and Reed gloats at his death because he was his political enemy. I mean, Eliot was like essentially a Nazi sympathizer. 6. And by the way, did you hear about grammar? Cut to ribbons in a photo finish by Stevie Wonder, a blind boy who dances on a heel. He just came out of the slang and broke it down before millions. It was bloody murder. 7. To make a long poem shorter, 3 things molehead lame with 4 or 5 eyes. 1. Your world is riding off into sunset. 2. The chips are down and nobody will chance your IOUs. 3. The last wish was a fluke, so now you have to return to being a fish. P.S. The enchantment is worn off. That's why you didn't like my reading list, right? It didn't include anyone on it that you could invite to a cocktail party and shoot a lot of bull, right? So you want to talk about it, take it out on my hide, right? Well, I got news for you, Professor Nothing. I am my own brand while you must be the fantasy of a Japanese cartoonist. A strange kind of dinosaur mouse. I can see it all now. The leaves are running low. It's the eve of extinction, and there are no holes to accept you're behind. You're about You wander about your long neck probing a tree. You think it's a tree, but it's really a trap. A cry of victory goes up in the kitchen and the world. A pest is dead, a prehistoric pest at that. The professor's prehistoric. It's an ancient traditional job. You know, Plato was a professor. There's been professors in Western culture for as long as there's been civilization, essentially. Really funny time. Prehistoric pest whom we will lug into a museum to show everyone how really funny you are. Your fate would make a good scenario, but the plot is between you and Charles Darwin, you know. White folksy business. As is said, I'm passing through. Just a guest professor. Just singing my song. Get along, little doggy, and jazz like that. Word has it that a big gold shipment is coming to California. I have to break all night if I'm to meet my partners. They want me to help score the ambush. And again, he kind of associates himself with the criminal, rebel, outlaw. But now, if you take the longer view, where's he ended up? He's ended up as the full professor, not the guest one. He's at Berkeley. It's a coveted job, you guys. Amazing job. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed that one. Let's listen to a little Sun Ra. So Sun Ra is part of what you might call Afrofuturism. Afrofuturism. He kind of always presented himself, and he led this big jazz group that he called the Orchestra. The Orchestra. Ark, like an ancient vessel for carrying precious materials. And he led this big group, and he had this persona where he literally presented to you that he was from Saturn, and he was from the future, and he dressed, but he also dressed in kind of like ancient Egyptian garb, very flamboyantly dressed, very unique stage presence, kind of philosophical guy, sort of great sense of humor, but just this sort of otherworldly point of view, and he thought of himself that way. If you listen to him, there's a great documentary on, hard to find for years, but now it's just sitting on Amazon Prime, called Sun Ra, Joyful Noise. And he's interviewed in the documentary, and he's just like, yeah, man, this world is shit. Like, everybody just does things for money. Black people are oppressed. There's no love. So, like, I'm not from here. I'm from Saturn. I'm just passing through. I'm just visiting you guys, bringing my joyful noise, bringing my music, and spreading love and enthusiasm wherever I go. And the orchestra has far outlived him. They perform regularly all over the world to this day. They've been led by people who are in the band and kind of stayed in the band. He attracted incredibly talented musicians around him, and he was just a prolific composer and performer. He performed countless concerts in his lifetime. He recorded something like 60 albums, just an absurd amount of music he wrote. He was a pioneer in using synthesizer and electronic music. So we'll listen to one of his best known songs now, not the whole thing, it's like 25 minutes, but it's called Space is the Place. And you'll hear this kind of weird mix. Is this jazz? Is this blues? Is this hip hop? Is this what is this music from Saturn? But you hear him on the keyboards in the background, and it really is kind of joyful and chaotic and brimming with energy and brimming with potential, and it's not trying to be perfect in any way. This is the song Space is the Place, and he's from Saturn. A lot of simple or short musical ideas that are then just repeated and repeated and repeated. That's why I was saying it was like a little bit like hip hop, but it still has that swing drumming from jazz. Most of his songs don't have words, but they often do. It's hypnotic. 20, 30-minute songs. He would play really long concerts. The band would like get up and march around almost like a New Orleans brass band. And this song was produced around the time the book came out, 1973. Book is released 1971. And now you hear the improvising starting to take over. Bass clarinet, John Gilmore, great musician. Played tenor sax mostly, but also multi-instrumentalist. Played these other reeds. And I guess I won't keep you torturing you with this, but I'm gonna keep listening to it. The thing to think about with someone like Sun Ra, you know, what's the time? He's from Saturn, and he's from ancient Egypt, and he was here way before, and he'll be here way after. What is this craziness? There's a great old quote from the British playwright, the humorist, the satirist, Oscar Wilde. He said, "We're all in the gutter. You know, our time on Earth is limited. It's mostly suffering, pain. But," he says, "we're all in the gutter, but some of us are looking at the stars." And Sun Ra's one of those people. He's looking at the stars. And I hope you are too. I hope you keep reading this book and reading literature as this comes over. And I'll be back with one other video in a moment.